Psalms 33:12. Blessed, happy, fortunate, to be envied is the nation whose God is the Lord, the people he has chosen in his heritage. Psalms 41, verse 1 to 3. Amplified Bible. Blessed, happy, fortunate, to be envied is he who considers the weak and the poor. The Lord will deliver him in the time of evil and trouble. The Lord will protect him and keep him alive. He shall be called blessed in the land, and you will not deliver him to the will of his enemies. The Lord will sustain, refresh, and strengthen him on his bed of languishing. All his bed you, O Lord, will turn, change, and transform in his illness. The teachings of our blessed Lord and Savior, the Beatitudes, in Matthew 5, verse 3. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The word blessed in the Amplified Bible means happy, to be envied and spiritually prosperous, with life, joy, and satisfaction in God's favor and salvation, regardless of their outward conditions, are the poor in spirit, the humble who rate themselves insignificant, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Let all of us conduct ourselves in a manner that will attract the blessings of the Lord. Honorable members, for your homework, memorize Matthew 5, verses 4 to 12, King James Version. May I take this opportunity to extend Happy Father's Day to our honorable fathers and to all our fathers in the sound of my voice. This coming Lord's Day is considered Father's Day around the world. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the Word of God by which we, a people, may rely and stand upon. God said it, we believe it, and that settles it for us. Undertake for the several necessities of all our fathers here in this honorable house, and those in the sound of my voice. Save to the uttermost those who are lost. Restore those who are in a backslidden condition. Heal the sick. Deliver those who are bound by Satan's self and sin. Bless our fathers and make them a blessing. In Jesus' name, amen. Praying together, Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, power, and the glory, forever. Amen.
Good morning, honorable members.
Morning.
Honorable members, let me begin by expressing my condolences to the family of Wallace Walter Nottage of the Nassau Village constituency, the owner of Action Upholstery, and the former landlord for the office of the Member of Parliament in that constituency. We ask God's peace over the family in the time of bereavement. I would also like to invite the entire Nassau Village constituency to a Father's Day celebration on Saturday beginning at 4 p.m. at the Action Upholstery Complex following the funeral of Walter Wallace Nottage. When the business of the House suspended last evening, the Honourable Member for Elizabeth had reserved the floor. The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Elizabeth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, rising in this place on behalf of the people that put me in this place remains a humbling experience. The people of Elizabeth and I have worked together, broken bread together, and grown together, all the while exchanging our aspirations and dreams for a better Elizabeth and a better Bahamas. I want to express my unwavering commitment to that journey with Elizabeth towards a community and a country that maximizes the shared values of all Bahamians, that abounds in opportunities for enhanced quality of living, and that exemplify faith and love. As I speak of these ideals, I am reminded of Pastor Ted Thompson, who has agreed to chair the Elizabeth Constituency Community Health Committee out of Believers Gospel Chapel, which is pastored by Roderick Roll. Mr. Speaker, he and his team have embraced this novel concept of empowering the people in the Eastern District by allowing them to participate in the determination of the health needs of their own community. And this exciting partnership with the Elizabeth Estates Clinic is changing the lives of the people that we are privileged to serve, and is changing the way that we do business. And though I have had a very rewarding career as a cardiac surgeon, the people of Elizabeth, their resilience, their resourcefulness, and their brotherhood have enriched and added to my worth in this new vocation. This year marks 9 years since our relationship started, and I want to say thank you, Elizabeth. This year we have focused on multiple cleanup efforts, a rodent or rat eradication campaign, hurricane relief efforts, and most exciting has been efforts to overhaul the clinic in Elizabeth Estates, renovation of the Elizabeth Estates Park with the construction of a gazebo, repair of the dilapidated non-functional bathrooms, as well as the soon-to-be constructed East Park walking track. We've had a very busy year of meetings and spirited town hall gatherings. We sponsored a basketball camp. We enjoyed back-to-school events and Christmas parties. Mr. Speaker, we have an active WhatsApp page where ideas and opinions flow freely. And this year's budget discussion has generated a lot of discussion. I want to thank my constituents for their candor. Democracy is indeed alive and well. We are Elizabeth strong. Mr. Speaker, Martin Luther King said that the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. Mr. Speaker, those words are most fitting for today's discussion and deliberation. And over the next minutes or so, I intend to spell out my position on this budget and the recommended policy approaches. The member for East Grand Bahama painted a startling but realistic picture of our nation's financial health. There's been much public pushback about the validity of his diagnosis and the prescription for the very bitter medicine to be swallowed by all. Many have tried to discredit the view that things are not really that bad, or that there is any need to make a substantial correction at this time. Let me say that I hear their voices and concerns. Their very existence proves that ours is indeed a thriving democracy with freedom of speech and expression of ideas. Just this morning, we had a beautiful demonstration of democracy in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. In a way, the member for East Grand Bahama entered my world and got a taste of the usual Bahamian response to the frightening reality of the physical and mental health status of Bahamians, which I have outlined on many occasions, and which I shall continue to repeat. We have all heard obese or heavyweight people say they're just big bone or solid, or diabetics that swear that they just have a little touch of sugar, or the out-of-control hypertensive who just got a little bit of pressure. Such bending of the truth or pleasantries ease the need for us to wrap our head around the brutal reality that these are diseases that kill and incapacitate. But as long as we don't claim it, Mr. Speaker, all can be well. The truth is usually far, far worse than we either individually or collectively want to admit. And while we may get up every day, eat breakfast, get dressed for work and school, the choices that we have made or not made over time will mean that some of us will not make it home alive, or we will be increasingly struck down by nasty, vicious, progressive, often preventable, mind you, diseases that destroy productivity, reduce our ability to enjoy life, and threaten our personal and national economic livelihood. The same is true with our economy, Mr. Speaker. Every year since independence, we have piled on millions of dollars of added debt, borrowing more and more, believing that we would never, ever reach that fiscal come-to-Jesus moment. Mr. Speaker, that come-to-Jesus moment is here. The use of these funds was, for the most part, appropriate for national development in clinics, in schools, in roads, and the establishment of tools for nation building, for entrepreneurship, and self-determination. We built NIB, BDB, BOB, BMC, Bahamas Air, BAIC, BEC, BTC, and many others. Managed as businesses, they would have been self-policing, self-financing, self-sustaining pillars of national development. They were introduced as investments for the greater good, for the upliftment of country and for the common man, and for the common men and women who have been denied opportunities for generations. The old people say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. You see, year after year since 1973, administrations have leveraged the limited capital that we have had to maximize the ability to invest public funds, ostensibly for the greater good. But this alphabet soup of government corporations have become political tools, employment agencies, and piggybacks for the interests of the rich, the powerful, and the connected, and a noose around the necks of ordinary Bahamians. So, Mr. Speaker, while I can play Monday morning quarterback and assess the performance of each administration over the years, and believe me, I can, let's simply say that 45 years later, and many billions of dollars later, the people of the Bahamas have not been adequately empowered. Since 1973, there have only been 2 organizations that formed the governments of the Bahamas. Now, to avoid comparing apples to oranges, when we look at total time in governance since 1973, let us restrict our consideration to the last 31 years. That would be 15 years versus 16 years. In that time, one of the administrations ran up deficits of $3.08 billion, and the other a cumulative deficit of $2.17 billion. Wrap your head around that, Mr. Speaker, and then refine your views and think about happened during 9/11, 2001. Think about the great mortgage meltdown of 2008 and Hurricanes Andrew, Floyd, Wilma, Jean, Joaquin, Matthew, Irma, all of which seriously impacted fiscal policy. But if you take all that into consideration, as a rule, year after year, one administration consistently ran deficits averaging 40% more of the Bahamian people's money than the other. Now, in the parable of talents, Jesus tells the story of a master who puts his servants in charge of his business when he went out of town. And he returned and evaluated them to see how faithful each was in making wise investments. You know the story. One had received 5 talents. One received 2, and the third received 1 talent. The first 2 servants put their talents to work and doubled the value. And the third buried it in the ground. And the master said to the first 2, well done, thou good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over little, and I will set you over much. But the third was described as an evil and lazy servant. And in the words of the apostles, the master described the stewardship of the third servant as worthless, a slave that should be thrown into outer darkness where there should be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So governments, as servants of the people, should always be judged on how well they managed the circumstance that they faced. Is the world in a recession? Or is the world thriving? Are we in the midst of a dot-com boom? Mr. Speaker, what I'm trying to say is when you consider the plight of Bahamians, though independent, we are not free. The dream of majority rule of 1967 has been thrown horribly off course. And the Bahamian who was shackled with the yoke of illiteracy, ill health, and few opportunities in 1967 now finds himself imprisoned in a modern world where he is trapped with few skills, with very little access to land and capital, and a feeling that this land has been possessed by others. Our people have become appropriately cynical. They no longer trust those that have been elected to serve and that we will act in their best interests. It is largely this theme that we hear outside and that we see being played out every day. Believe me, I hear it, I see it, I feel it. And it's for this reason that many have lost courage to do the right thing before. The members for Kalani and East Grand Bahama, as you look at the situation and feel the pressure, and you hear the noise, your human frailty might lead you to become timid or conservative. I am happy to know that you have not become so. You have to have heart, Mr. Speaker. So this morning, I am here to support a revolution. Yes. A revolution of thought, a revolution of ideas, yes, to restore hope to our people. Like any revolution, it is going to require struggle and pain and sacrifice. People ask, why this budget? Why now? Why lead the people through a difficult path, different than the path we have walked for so long? This morning, I shall, on behalf of the people of Elizabeth, put forward the case as I see it, through their eyes and through mine. And I'm going to do it using the tools that I know how. We're going to conduct a medical checkup on a few of the vital organs of the body that we call the Bahamas. So let's start with the spine, Mr. Speaker, the backbone that supports much of what we do and provides protection for retirement, illness, and accident. We call that organ the National Insurance Board. Mr. Speaker, the actuarial review done on NIB in 2011 by Derek Osborne, followed up in 2013 by the ILO, the International Labor Organization, tells the story of a rapidly shrinking NIB reserve fund, which will be depleted in 10 years, Mr. Speaker, by 2028, or sooner, unless dramatic changes are made to the contributory plan. Not my words, the actuarial review, number 9 and 10, available online. Without correction, NIB will run out of money in their fund in 10 years. You see, the number or the ratio of contributors to pensioners continues to decrease every year. And NIB has lost millions of dollars each year for the last 2 years. But when we dig deeper and look further at the spine, National Insurance Board's assets are heavily weighted in Bahamas government registered stock, about $550 million worth. Bahamas Mortgage Corporation bonds, 101 million. Bahamas Development Bank, 43 million. An Education Loan Authority, 47 million. It's also invested in Bank of the Bahamas, a company that has lost $250 million over the last few years. Given the precarious fiscal standing of all of the above, and the fact that 25% of our working population does not pay NIB contributions, NIB should have acted to increase contributions to achieve sustainability. It should have invested in more prudent ventures, but that's not what it did. It continued a policy of incestuous investments in poorly performing corporations whose survival was itself dependent on NIB. And this codependency threatens to pose serious risks to the guarantor of the whole shooting match, the government and the people of the Bahamas. NIB has become, and my apologies to the member from Garden Hills, a bloated entity with administrative expenses consuming more and more every year. Mr. Speaker, we are headed to our own Bahamian-made fiscal crisis. This is not talking down the country that I love. This is simply speaking the truth. We have failed to act, and NIB, the backbone, the spine of our country, is in peril. Between 2023, that's 5 years from now, and 2026, approximately $110 million marathon of BMC bonds, Bahamas Mortgage Corporation bonds, will become due. $110 million of bonds will become due. Since my tenure as chairman of the Bahamas Mortgage Corporation, we realized that the massive underfunding of the sinking fund has not been addressed. The Bahamas Mortgage Corporation doesn't have $110 million to pay off those bonds, Mr. Speaker. NIB is counting on that money to pay sickness, benefits, and pensions. But given the 40% non-performing loans, if Bahamas Mortgage Corporation was to use current loan provisioning, Exuma and Ragged Island could speak to this, it is questionable whether any accountant would say that it remains a going concern. Mr. Speaker, NIB and the people of the Bahamas is counting on that money from Bahamas Corporation, Mortgage Corporation, and maybe that money is going to have to come from the government of the Bahamas or the people of the Bahamas. BOB, $250 million of the people's money to keep it afloat. BAIC, the member for Golden Gates told us how bad it is. BMC, BDB, Bahamas Air, Water and Sewage Corporation, all public corporations that are bleeding the people's money. Why? Because we have not dealt with defaulted loans. We have not dealt or required these corporations to function without sucking at the trough kept filled by the hard-working people of the Bahamas. At no point have we been prepared to accept that the day of reckoning would be nigh. Instead, we just borrowed and borrowed and floated bonds and borrowed, racking up massive amounts of debt. So in 2018, 2019, we will use roughly $1 billion of our money, the people's money, to service debt. Think on that. $380 million for interest alone. That's more than we pay for education or health care. Even though our direct debt to GDP is now less than 60%, I am informed that government-guaranteed debt could, if circumstances expose our Treasury to a call, to an additional $3.5 billion. And the hundreds of millions, if not billions, of dollars of pension commitments which remain an unbooked liability are considered. So what does this mean for the average Bahamian, Mr. Speaker?
Tell us, man. Tell us.
Using the direct charge alone of the national debt, every man, woman, and child in this country today owes $20,000. But of course, based on the size of the workforce, which in November 2017 was 204,000, and since it's the workers that pay the bill, each worker has a bill of $38,700. Think on that, Mr. Speaker. You add the unbudgeted liabilities for pensions and others, and we're up to about $53,000 per worker. Right now, today, that's what you owe. The world loves to say never again. The lessons of the 2008 mortgage subprime meltdown ought to have taught us a lesson. And this international calamity, which sent our own economy into a tailspin, confirmed that the economy should be built on solid ground. So, Mr. Speaker, there's an eerie similarity to the mounting public physical health issues and our national economic health. Both are greater risks than we collectively admit. Both pose an existential threat to our survival. Both need real intervention now, and the treatment ain't going to be easy going down.
No way.
Both require real talk, Mr. Speaker, in plain English, so that every man, woman, and child can understand that we have collectively dropped the ball. This is not simply an FNM or PLP thing. This is a Bahamian thing.
Absolutely.
The statistics in health that I'm going to go over briefly are not much different than last year. We continue to have the worst profile of NCDs in the Americas and the highest rate of HIV/AIDS outside of sub-Saharan Africa. Hundreds upon hundreds of our people are afflicted with kidney failure, last count about 500, requiring that the people of the Bahamas pay for dialysis at a cost of anywhere between $50,000 and $80,000 per patient per year. The same way we fail to claim our health reality, for 45 years post-independence, we have, for assorted reasons, added to the financial crisis that we now seek to correct. The approach for our medical challenges requires medication, dietary change, and an abandonment of the lifestyle that shuns physical exercise. The prescription for our national physical illness requires that we wean ourselves from the sugary sweetness of borrowing, that we spend no more than we earn, and that we understand that we cannot have it all. You see, as a surgeon, I am often face to face with a frightened patient or a family to advise them of the dreaded diagnosis of cancer or gunshot wound or heart disease. Imagine the response when I say to a frightened diabetic that the infection which started in their toe, which was ignored, has now spread up their leg and into their bloodstream, and now requires an amputation of the entire leg in order to save their life. The usual response is, "Doc, do you really have to chop my leg off?" They don't believe that you have to. Imagine being told that the worsening cough that your husband or wife wanted you to get checked out was due to a cancer in your lung from years of smoking, and it now requires removal of the entire lung and chemotherapy. How would you feel if you are told that you need an operation that involves taking an electric saw, cutting open your chest, stopping your heart, to do some plumbing work on the blood vessels that have been blocked from many years of high blood pressure and diabetes, in part because the medicines that were prescribed to you was just too much of a nuisance to take. Or someone said that all the medical mumbo-jumbo was just a racket. Just take some noni and go home, you can be straight. When pushed for more information, and you hear that no one in any hospital in any country has ever done that operation without a risk of death, stroke, bleeding, or infection, and in some case, like in a repair of the aorta or ruptured aneurysm, the risk of death with an operation could be as high as 40%. 40 people that have a successful operation in that instance could die. But without it, death was a near certainty. You see, such a recommendation should never be made without a careful analysis of the situation, an assessment of the facts, and a deep, abiding love and concern for the patient who has entrusted you, the surgeon. Often I invite the patient who is sometimes unconvinced to get a second opinion. And so East Grand Bahama outlined the diagnosis and outlined the recommended treatment plan. And so today Elizabeth stands here in support of that diagnosis and in support of that treatment plan. We have to increase government revenue to provide necessary services while adopting a disciplined fiscal strategy of restraint, avoiding waste and unnecessary spending. But we have to do it while charting a progressive vision for a better Bahamas. The two things got to go hand in hand. No pain, no gain. But by that same token, the people have a right to say no gain, no pain. I took an oath and I said, first of all, do no harm. And the honorable member for Kalani knows exactly what I mean, because he too was trained that way. As a strong swimmer who has served as a lifeguard, I know that a rescuer can help no one if he or she drowns in the attempt. The best way for a nation to help any or all of its people is to be fiscally strong. But our fundamentals are not strong. No matter how we've tried to kick this day of reckoning down the road, delaying this correction will add more misery and suffering. None of us look forward to increasing prices. None of us want to see people suffer. None of us celebrate an increase in the misery index. But like a general leading troops into battle against a dangerous and brutal enemy, we must be able to articulate a vision of things better, a vision of hope, a hope for a brighter tomorrow. You see, in battle, some people will die. Some people will be wounded. But only if and when people die for a just cause can the casualties ever be justified. And history will tell the story of the revered ones who would have died for justice, for freedom, for human rights. The painful decisions that we make can only make sense if they result in opportunities, empowerment, ownership, and freedom for our people. It requires heart, Mr. Speaker. It requires a soldier's heart. Outside, today, we saw democracy in action. Those of you who know me know that I'm a student of history, Mr. Speaker. And I look at the brilliant leaders of the past, like Churchill, like Patton, people who would have led in the face of mounting adversity. But one of the greatest leaders remains relatively unknown. This is Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore, who led the first battle in Vietnam. And he landed with a total of 400 of his men on landing zone X-ray. I think it was around 1965. What they didn't realize was they had landed at the base of an enemy camp where they were outnumbered 10-1. Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore in a message to his troops as he was leading them into battle, gave one of the most inspiring speeches. I want to paraphrase it a little bit and then complete it the way he said it. So look around you. In the House of Assembly, we got a teacher from Garden Hills. We got a student from Baintown and lawyers from all over. We have preachers. We got doctors. We got accountants. We got PLPs and F&Ms, Baptists, Methodists, Catholics, Anglicans, and people from the Church of God. We got blacks, we got whites, and we got some light-skinned Negroes. All Bahamians. Now here in this country, some men and women may experience discrimination and stress because of race or creed, economic or social status. But for you now, and for me, all that is gone. We are moving into the valley of the shadow of death, where you will watch the back of the man or woman next to you, as he will watch yours. And you won't care what color he is, or by what name he calls God, or his or her political persuasion. They say we're leaving home. We're going to what home was always supposed to be. So let us understand the situation. We are going into battle against a tough and determined enemy. I can't promise you that I will bring you all home alive. But this I swear before you and before Almighty God, that when we go into battle, I will be the first to set foot on the field, and I will be the last to step off. And I will leave no one behind. Dead or alive, we will all come home together. So help me God. Mr. Speaker, I now want to turn my attention to my portfolio as Minister of Health, with responsibility for the Ministry of Health and its agencies inclusive of the regulatory councils, the Department of Public Health, community health clinics, the Public Hospital Authority, which includes Princess Margaret, Ryan, Sandilands, the National Emergency Medical Services, the Bahamas National Drug Agency, the Materials Management Directorate, and National Health Insurance. We're now moving from the spine to the heart. It's been said that the health of the nation is the wealth of a nation. And truly, we all need good health for social and economic development. Indeed, it is my ministry's mandate to ensure that the highest quality of services for health promotion, health protection, and health care are accessible to all people of the Bahamas. And this budget will do more for our citizens, as my government seeks to not only just treat the health ailments, but also aggressively move the paradigm. Now, Mr. Speaker, I want to start, first of all, with a clarification on the status of the breadbasket review. In the speech from the throne, we promised to eliminate VAT on breadbasket items. On reviewing the 45-year-old list, however, we realized that the items on the breadbasket list were not ideal. Many were calorie-dense, nutrient-poor, with a number of items which, when combined with an inactive lifestyle, increase the risk for becoming overweight, obese, or developing one or more diseases. Now, the breadbasket was a very positive social initiative in 1971. But the drafters could not have known that this life-saving initiative that saved many from malnutrition and allowed them to get a belly full would become a part of the cause, a reason for the epidemic of obesity, hypertension, and diabetes. Now, we all know that the breadbasket contains butter, margarine, cooking oil, mayonnaise, mustard, grits, corned beef, canned meats, evaporated condensed milk, fresh milk, cheese, eggs, rice, flour, bread, sugar, baby cereal, baby formula, baby food, and broths. Now, we conducted an extensive review of that list, and we committed to an extensive national consultative and educational campaign, which is ongoing and not complete. And the importance of this initial and ongoing engagement with the public cannot be understated. When we complete this consultation, Mr. Speaker, we expect that the revised agreed list will be gazetted by the Ministry of Labor on the advice of my ministry, and there will be no need for additional legislation. But during this budget debate, we have proposed a separate approach, and that is the zero rating or elimination of VAT from the bread basket items in general. And that activity has a $12 million budget impact, and it requires legislative amendments. Now, that time-sensitive activity will take place with this exercise. Because there has been overwhelming views expressed on two items to date, sugar will definitely not be on the price control list, and that's why you don't see it in the legislation that we're putting forward today. Corned beef was found wanting. It was weighed in the balance, but it was granted clemency, Mr. Speaker, and so it is on probation. Moving forward, I anticipate that we will work to achieve consensus to remove margarine, condensed milk, mayonnaise, canned soups and broths, and canned meats like Spam or Vienna sausages. We expect to add beans and peas, raw almonds and cashews, fresh oranges, fresh apples, root crops like sweet potato, pumpkin, cassava, eddy, Irish potatoes, oatmeal, tuna, sardine, mackerel in water, healthier milk, healthier flour, healthier bread, healthy butter and oils, and healthier rice. We expect that the combination of VAT elimination and price control, 18% wholesale, 21% retail, will not only make healthy foods less expensive, it will make them affordable. I turn now to the budget figures. The approved 2017-2018 health recurrent budget totaled $307,596,885. For 2018-2019, approved recurrent estimates for health totaled $293,915,388, representing a 4% decrease. An additional $24 million has been allocated for capital spending. Now, Mr. Speaker, distribution of allocated funding cannot be overlooked. Because of the total budget allocation, personal emoluments and allowances accounts for 68%. 20% or $20 million or 7% is allocated to NHI, and this leaves 25% for operations of all public sector health facilities. Now, our government has over the last year been committed to looking at contracts, and our review allowed us to save approximately $900,000. These savings can now be used to offset some of our pitfalls or shortfalls. But a far greater issue than these contracts, Mr. Speaker, has been the unwillingness of the public to pay the nominal sums required by law. An emergency room visit that might cost $1,500 down the street from Princess Margaret Hospital is charged only $10 at PMH, and it is rarely paid. An ICU bed that costs $2,000 per night at Doctors Hospital bills out at PMH for less than $100 and is rarely paid. We collect less in the emergency room at PMH, where we see 53,000 patients a year, than many hospitals collect in total hospital revenue for a single patient. We bill every day $263,635, and it's expected that we ought to get $88 million in revenue. 87% of those charges, Mr. Speaker, because people are either exempt or do not pay, is never paid. 87%. Now, when we look at the unpaid bills for PMH and the RAND since 1988, unpaid bills for care at $10, at $5, at $20, Mr. Speaker, has added up to $782,596,050. $782 million of unpaid bills, Mr. Speaker. Another problem we have is in insurance spend. It is believed that between $200,000 and $250,000 of insurance premiums are collected on behalf of Bahamians. Doctors Hospital makes about $60 million per year. The Public Hospital Authority collects about $12 million. What is surprising, Mr. Speaker, is that as Bahamians, we do not support Bahamian healthcare facilities or Bahamian physicians or Bahamian diagnostic services. When we speak about sovereignty, we are a sovereign nation, but we are supporting South Florida, and yet we claim to have concerns about the healthcare system in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. I turn now to national health insurance. NHI is alive, but very much at the crossroads. It remains a priority for my ministry. As of May 2018, 40,518 applications were received, 33,661 beneficiaries have been enrolled, and they are benefiting from primary care services. The $40 million allocation in 2017-2018 was underutilized, due in part to review and restructuring of what was inherited by my government, and some of the funds were repurposed to close the funding gap at PHA. So in this budget, $20 million has been allocated. Now, Mr. Speaker, I want to tell a story of a regular Bahamian family. The father, a 66-year-old man, was admitted to the hospital on August 2nd, 2009, with excruciating chest pain. And his story and that of his family illustrates the serious financial burden imposed by the NCDs. But it also demonstrates how shifting circumstances can lead to varied responses that, while different, are still principled. Our patient, because of his high blood pressure, the heart was ejecting blood with such force that the jet of blood created by his heartbeat cut into the wall of his main artery. I want you to think of the force of a pressure cleaner, where the water can strip paint off a wall. We call that condition an aortic dissection. Simply put, the main artery is ripped apart so that blood travels through the wall instead of in the middle. Untreated, without surgery, patients die at a rate of 1% per hour. 1/4 or 25% die on the first day, and so on. Now, given the tremendous risk of death, we recommended that he be airlifted to fly to a facility. But his initial quote from hospitals in Florida and Texas ranged from $250,000 to $500,000. So his family gathered up all their savings and flew him to Mexico, where he underwent life-saving surgery at a total cost below $200,000. And on August 20th, 2009, he returned to Nassau to recover and to continue to receive medical care. And he did well until his death 2 years later. But that disease had taken his life and most of the savings of his family. And this catastrophic illness creates tremendous hardships, but not only his family, but for families all over the Bahamas. Luckily, in this case, they were able to gather up the funds. Now, the story would be incomplete if I stopped there, Mr. Speaker, because on December 29th, less than 5 months after our patient got sick, I got a call from the patient's son-in-law, a Mr. Johnson, calling about his wife who was pregnant with their first child. I know it well because it was roughly 6 weeks before the Elizabeth by-election, and I was a little bit distracted. The man's wife was an otherwise healthy, hypertensive young woman from Eleuthera, and she was in the 3rd trimester of her pregnancy when she developed chest pain. Now, she had an aortic dissection just like her father, but having spent all the funds on her father, she was in no way able to raise the kind of funds required for her surgery. She understood the risk of death without surgery, and I want you to think about this in the context of this budget. Without it, she and her baby would die. It was a bitter pill to swallow. As a medical team, we knew that a dissection in a young woman carried risk. A dissection during pregnancy was even riskier, and now there was the possibility of not one death, but two. We wanted her to be airlifted, but we knew, and we had incontrovertible proof, that she could not. There were no funds. She was uninsured. Same issue, Mr. Speaker, different circumstances. On principle, we felt that her father would do better if he was airlifted. On principle, several months later, except the patient had no means to be airlifted, we felt obligated to give her a chance. Think on this, Mr. Speaker, the next time someone asks you why make one recommendation at one point and the opposite recommendation at the other. Why oppose VAT in 2014 and come back in 2018 and increase it? We agreed to give this patient surgery at Doctors Hospital, and we asked the family to get donations of blood immediately. Together with Dr. James Johnson, Paul Ramphal, and Mark Weish, and Anton Roberts, and the rest of the team, we delivered that baby by cesarean section, and then we opened her chest and repaired her aorta. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they do comfort me. All this was done with the assistance of the incredible team of doctors and nurses and other professionals at Doctors Hospital. And she was then transferred back to PMH. This patient's name is Shelley, Mr. Speaker, and she is the wife of the Member of Parliament for South and Central Eleuthera. Shelley recovered, and she continues to do well. She gave me permission to tell her story. Stephen, that particularly precious baby, is now 8 years old. And I recently had occasion to visit him at an assembly at his school, Emma Cooper Primary in Palmetto Point, where he's completing 3rd grade. Shelley, given a chance, had an opportunity to go on to help her husband win the seat for South and Central Eleuthera. Mr. Speaker, you see, there are many Bahamian families who face financial ruin or are forced to make obscene, painful decisions of life and death when they're faced with catastrophic health challenges. Let me say that we remain steadfast in our commitment to ensure that comprehensive diagnostic and interventional heart services are provided at PMH, inclusive of the creation of a cardiac catheterization lab. In this term, the government of the Bahamas understands the importance of providing access to affordable, quality health care for all Bahamians. However, the single payer model introduced under the previous government has proven to be unaffordable and is unsustainable in the long term. So in keeping with the directives of the Cabinet, the NHIA, the National Health Insurance Authority, has a vision for universal access for health care services and to achieve the goal of universal coverage. And that's why we are revamping NHI. At the center of this will be the introduction of the Bahamas Care Plan to address high-cost health care, as it is often referred to, or catastrophic care. You see, cookouts have become commonplace in our communities. They all too often fall short in raising what's required to pay for care. And while cookouts are an integral part of the social fabric and culture of the Bahamas, cookouts for this purpose need to end. And this year, through NHI, this government will be taking the first steps in achieving this objective. So we will establish a high-cost care fund, the Bahamas Care Fund, where we pool risk to manage high-cost care across the entire population. However, NHI cannot do this alone. And so we will be consulting with key stakeholders, including the private sector, government employees, healthcare providers, union groups, and physicians, to get their input before making recommendations about the high-cost care plan. Together, I believe we can drastically reduce the need for medical cookouts. We anticipate a sliding scale contributory plan covering the most vulnerable, expanding coverage to those who are currently uninsured, at a cost that is manageable, and we anticipate about $15 to $80 per month. We will be honest with patients and the public about the cost of any such program. The $40 million for NHI in this year's budget was paid for by the Consolidated Fund. It was not free. It never was free. We used the tax receipts from the people. But we hope to outline a plan which is administered by the existing well-developed insurance industry, but which will likely sell for about 30 to 40% of current major medical plans. Under the revamped NHI plan, the government will now focus its resources on Bahamians who are most in need, who cannot currently afford health insurance. The Bahama Care Plan will leverage the existing expertise of the private industry and healthcare providers in the Bahamas to deliver better services. Mr. Speaker, public policy demands that we make interventions that improve the lives of our people, because only then can we justify the cost. I now wish to address matters related to the crucial need to improve the management and delivery of services for emergency and urgent care in the Commonwealth. As highlighted during the recent national tragedy on Labor Day, June 1st, A&E at PMH is the principal and national focal point for all emergencies. It is the only Level 3 trauma center in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas and is the main locale for mass casualty management. And so it must always be in a state of readiness to provide appropriate interventions to minimize the loss of life and reduce the impact of illnesses or injuries. I call A&E ground zero, but it currently leaves much to be desired. Every day, our healthcare teams stand in the gap with limited resources, an outdated facility, and less than ideal diagnostic tools. But on Labor Day, Mr. Speaker, their performance made our nation proud.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah.
Colleagues would be aware of the ongoing challenges at A&E that are unacceptable to the people of this nation. And though we intend to construct a new emergency facility on site as part of the PMH master plan redevelopment, there's an immediate need for changes to be made to address the severe overcrowding and poor working conditions for our dedicated and competent staff. The new A&E will take approximately 3 or 4 years to materialize. And in the interim, efforts will be directed to renovation and revitalization of areas adjacent to accident emergency, system improvements in protocols, processes, communication, and patient engagements. All of this within the constraint of our budget. Now, in my maiden address last year, I made a commitment to share the utilization data of A&E at PMH and the RAN. In the year 2016-2017, we saw 53,737 cases in A&E. We saw 1,260 assaults, 1,584 road traffic accidents, 226 stab wounds, and 181 gunshot wounds. Of note, we saw a reduction in the number of gunshot wounds patients who presented to PMH alive compared to 2015-2016 when we saw 210, and the previous year where we saw 243. That represents a reduction of 14% over the previous year and 27% below the year before that. I'm going to table this data, Mr. Speaker. At the RAN, we saw 36,331 patients, and that included 130 assaults, 59 stab wounds, and 49 gunshot wounds. Now, compared to 2015-2016, that was an increase of 53% when we had 32, and a whopping 300% increase from the year before. Now, Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the overall net reduction year over year, gun violence and stabbings remain unacceptably high. We like to say that our neighbor to the north is the gun capital of the world. In 2013, they recorded 73,000 non-fatal gunshot wounds. They have a population of 325 million. They had 11,208 gun homicides and 21,000 gun-related suicides, with an average shooting rate of 26.1 per 100,000. In New Providence, our gunshot wound rate is 66 per 100,000. Now, Pine Ridge, East Grand Bahama, Marco City, Central Grand Bahama, West Grand Bahama, and Bimini, I regret to inform you that with a population of 52,000, Grand Bahama has become the gun capital of the Bahamas, with a shooting rate of 94 per 100,000. Let me commend my colleague from Mount Moriah. Our data supports the data of the police that gun violence is trending down, but it remains unacceptably high. However, as our recent Bloody Week attests. Yep. And while we support the efforts of the judiciary and armed services, we all have a role to play. So my ministry will sponsor several studies to look at the potential role of mental and psychological challenges, as well as the impact of nutrition, specifically micronutrient deficiency and the impact of sugar, fat, preservatives, chemicals, steroids, and antibiotics in the diet on the expression of violence. You see, in addition to alcohol and drugs, Mr. Speaker, there's an emerging field called epigenetics that suggests that environmental factors can have an enormous impact on the manifestation of our God-given genetic potential. And so we will study this even as we push a healthy lifestyle agenda. This is yet another reason for a policy that supports healthy eating. No presentation on health in 2018 could possibly be given without a discussion of marijuana. And so I'm going to get myself in trouble and speak a little bit to this. You see, against the backdrop of the recent legalization of recreational marijuana use in Canada and the disconnect between the states and the federal government of the United States, there has been a tremendous discussion about the possible role of medical marijuana, the economic viability of marijuana farming and processing. Many people are deeply passionate about this subject, Mr. Speaker, and they have expressed the view that we have lagged behind the rest of the region and the world in modifying our approach. Now, we hear those people. The WHO in November 2017 published a statement that CBD, cannabinol, one of the components different than THC, is neither harmful nor addictive. The Bahamas has agreed to be guided by CARICOM Task Force on Marijuana, and they are scheduled to give a report in July 2018. So subsequently, the Cabinet of the Bahamas will, as we have committed, consider any implications for changes in national policy. But at this time, there are no adjustments to our laws or policy on marijuana, and my ministry will have no recommendations until that time. Certainly, given our unique challenges with violence, careful sovereign consideration and public consideration of the matter is necessary, because what works elsewhere may or may not work in the Bahamas. We acknowledge that for accident and emergency to function in its intended manner, that urgent care services at the community level must be fully resourced to achieve the intent of the urgent care project that we are currently pursuing. And with that project, we hope to decompress the patient load in A&E, change utilization patterns at A&E, enhance emergency services, change patient behavior, and improve patient experience. And as previously advised, our intent is to provide continuity of care in a seamless manner between accident and emergency, the community clinics, specifically Elizabeth Estates and South Beach. Currently, people come to A&E with all kinds of ailments, but they come for primary care, for mental health concerns, minor illnesses, prescription refills, and medical certificates, when they should be coming for accidents and emergencies. So in our redevelopment plan, we propose an additional 30% or 3,000 square foot working space improvement. This will include new bathrooms, improved examination spaces to increase privacy, a redesigned entrance, patient advocate offices, and much needed isolation facilities. We will upgrade the orthopedic and wound care clinics and the registration area. It is estimated that this will cost $5.6 million, inclusive of the enabling works in the current unused space. The redevelopment of the community clinics at South Beach and Elizabeth Estates will be simultaneously ongoing. Both of those clinics see well in excess of 40,000 patients per year. South Beach seeing 46,000, Elizabeth Estates 45,000. And both of these clinics will be upgraded to provide urgent care services. These projects intended to be completed within 12 months. I want to move now to talk about human resources. You see, Mr. Speaker, a shrinking human resource pool, the downturn in the national economy, and a slow rebound is creating a perfect storm. Our National Health Services Strategic Plan calls for a health system that has the right number of individuals performing the right roles in the right locations. And you may be aware that there are serious staffing shortages in many of our medical facilities. We have committed almost $1.5 million in this budget to the training of health professionals at the national level and within the Department of Public Health, and PHA has agreed to do the same. The greatest problem is within nursing. The nursing profession, which is critical to the delivery of health care services, and there are about 1,500 active nurses, is the single largest group of healthcare providers. And they provide services in hospitals, community clinics, schools, prisons, nursing homes, urban and rural communities. In some of the more remote areas of the Family Islands, nurses may at times be the only healthcare provider. And this speaks to their importance in the role in the healthcare delivery system. In recent times, recruitment teams from the United States, Canada, and the UK have visited the Bahamas, offering more attractive salaries and benefits, signing bonuses and lucrative relocation grants, all to persuade nurses to be employed abroad. These efforts have been widely successful, and we are paying a serious price for it in terms of our ability to maintain services. At this time, we currently have a deficiency of 528 registered nurses and 140 trained clinical nurses. This severely challenges the ability of the system to provide health services. During the past few months, my meetings with nurses have revealed that many nurses are dissatisfied with their salaries, working conditions, and opportunities for specialty training, among other issues. We have heard them, and we are in the process of reviewing salaries for nurses and providing more opportunities for specialty training and improving the work environment as some of the major retention strategies. Even in this tight budget, Mr. Speaker, we have to prioritize. The Ministry of Health continues to implement programs and initiatives to ensure that the knowledge and skills available can be successfully used to deliver nursing care to the benefit of Bahamian people. And so we have successfully completed a recent psychiatric mental health diploma program, a trained clinical nurse course competency strengthening program, a trained clinical nurse certificate program at UB, and we are about to sponsor an 18-month midwifery program, also at UB. We are now in the midst of an eye training program or ophthalmology nurse diploma program, a nurses leadership and management program, and a graduate nurse to registered nurse transition program. Building on the recent verification exercise undertaken by the government, a comprehensive update of the physician manpower needs assessment was completed for the 3 public hospitals and 92 community clinics. And this has led to strategies aimed at reducing deficits, determination of the minimum number of these clinicians needed, and guiding the equitable distribution of staff across institutions. Physician shortages not only negatively impact the public's access to important care at the primary, secondary, and tertiary level, but it also limits the public health sector's capacity for improving the standards and quality of care provided. Now, we have been active in our response to addressing these deficits. And so with respect to our primary care clinics, there are clear paths for building capacity of physician resources to meet our public sector needs. There are currently 31 family medicine trained physicians working in the public sector, 5 of whom are deployed in Abaco, Grand Bahama, Bimini, Eleuthera, and San Salvador. But we require, Mr. Speaker, another 120 family medicine physicians. They're just not here. If we are going to provide adequate primary care for our community health clinics throughout the archipelago. And so to meet this need, there are plans underway to expand the residency training programs to accommodate more physicians in training at one time. But we also have another bold initiative called the Office of Medical Staff Development. And the objectives of this new office is to facilitate equitable distribution of the national public sector physician workforce, ensure coverage of health services across the Bahamas, reduce stagnation of career development across junior physicians, and increase the number of independent practitioners. Mr. Speaker, UWI has done a phenomenal job in growing the number of Bahamian physicians since its inception. But funding support, which has been growing and has been sustained, is no longer sustainable. The number of medical interns entering the clinical training environment has outstripped our funding. The situation is further strained by a system which has also grown in the number of senior house officers or junior physicians within the teaching hospital. So the health system response to this challenge required creation of an environment where junior physicians would enroll in specialist training programs or a foundation program which would prepare them to practice independently and deliver safe, quality health care in communities across the country. When we look at the pharmacy, lab, and allied health, my ministry conducted a comprehensive review of manpower required. We have a deficiency of a total of 800 skilled workers required among all these disciplines. These deficiencies have to be filled in order to ensure sustainable access to health services, improved administration of the services, and expansion of laboratory, radiology, and other services, particularly at the new facilities in Abaco and Exuma. Mr. Speaker, unless we, and I mean all Bahamians, are inspired to think differently, act differently, and do differently, we will forever be stuck in a revolving door of treating diseases. I know to some that these words confirm that I have transitioned from an acute care, hospital-based specialist to become a public health convert. But the reality is that we need to move from the revolving and incredibly expensive madness to inculcating a health and wellness culture. And so in 2018-2019, my ministry has allocated $1.5 million for wellness initiatives. How to eat properly. We have a national campaign called Cookin' Sexy, an aggressive public sensitization thrust to improve our nation's understanding on what's healthy and what's not. A third prong to our wellness initiative is specifically focused on school-age children. When we take stock of the fact that every day, every single day, our children come under blatantly obscene attack, because as they walk, greeting them at school gates, they cross the thresholds where there are displays of the deadliest and most addictive chemicals on earth, high fructose corn syrup. They deserve better. My ministry supports and will propose a tax on sugar-sweetened beverages to decrease consumption and to improve revenue to support healthy lifestyle initiatives. We will support an initiative for safe cycling. Mr. Speaker, my ministry is ready to lead, and despite the fact that we're responsible for the public's health, far too many of the people in the Ministry of Health are unhealthy. And so we are going to pilot a healthy lifestyle initiative with exercise and dietary modification. We will continue to have an all-out assault on the risk factors that increase the Bahamians' likelihood of developing non-communicable diseases of cancer, obesity, diabetes, and addiction. My ministry has allocated funding to conduct a population-based research study to define our current health status and risk factor profile. This is called our STEP survey, and it will be administered during the months of August and September 2018. Mr. Speaker, I want to conclude with a discussion of public health, where my ministry continues to be prepared to respond to public health threats. Ongoing threats and resultant public health emergencies occurring from natural, biological, and hazards require sustained focus on ensuring mechanisms are in place for early detection. And our public health warriors work quietly but constantly, keeping us all safe. The government's HIV goal remains to end AIDS by 2030 and to ensure that healthy lives are maintained by promoting well-being for all at every age. But we have a serious HIV/AIDS problem, Mr. Speaker. At the end of 2015, the Ministry of Health reported that there were 8,667 people living with HIV in the Bahamas. I am proud to report that this government has launched the Treat All People Living with HIV strategy. We endorse the international 90-90-90 campaign that seeks to have 90% of HIV-infected people know their status, to have 90% of HIV-infected people on appropriate HIV-suppressing medication, and that 90% of them have complete clinical suppression of the virus. Right now, we are seeing increased community viral suppression, with about 65% of people on HIV medication having a viral load which shows suppression. This is part of a larger strategy to make the Bahamas a world leader in the battle to fast track to the end of AIDS, but it's going to require additional effort. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to speak very briefly, in the interest of time, on the Department of Public Health, which manages 82 clinics throughout the archipelago. Since 2016, the department received less than 2% of the health budget. And in this year, we have increased this to 6%. That's still not quite enough, but it is dramatically better. In 2017, we saw roughly 500,000 visits to these 82 facilities. And we are committed to strengthening and restructuring the public health system to support and expand access to safe, high-quality primary and public health services. So over this next year, we have embarked on several strategies to repair, redesign, and expand healthcare facilities in New Providence and the Family Islands, to improve customer service and waiting times, to facilitate and improve information management system, and to improve health education. We plan to execute repairs at the following clinics: in Sims, Fresh Creek, Staniard Creek, and Central Andros, Camps Bay, Cockburn Town, Black Point, New Abaco, and Exuma Primary Health Facilities, Cooperstown, Matthewtown, Fleming Street, Elizabeth Estates, and South Beach. Mr. Speaker, I've been criticized for outlining the problems in healthcare and not showing any progress. Despite the shortage of fund and dealing with the ongoing challenge with bed space in the Princess Margaret Hospital, I am pleased to report the completion of the Corey Newbold ward at Princess Margaret Hospital. Once we get the furniture in, we expect an additional 24 beds to be made available to relieve overcrowding in Princess Margaret Hospital. We are just about, we are well along the way in the completion of the kitchen, the cafeteria at the Rand Memorial Hospital. We recognize the need to save money. And so we have solarized. Upside down? There we go. We're going to be solarizing our facilities. This is just another look at the kitchen facility. It's got a ways to go. Mr. Speaker, let me conclude. Many people have asked whether this is the time for an increase in VAT. Many people have asked whether the people of this country can handle this medication, this bitter medicine. I have sought to outline point by point, step by step, why there's an incredible urgency of now, why we can no longer kick this ball down the road. I do not believe that there's any exaggeration. I do not believe that we are willing to subject the people of this country to stress unless there is a greater vision. What we are seeking to do, Mr. Speaker, is not just look at today, but to create opportunities to have our people achieve the potential that they have missed out on for decades. And so Elizabeth stands in this House today to express my support, our support for this budget. Elizabeth stands here today to express support for the increase in VAT from 7.5% to 12%. It is bitter medicine, Mr. Speaker, but it is medicine intended to make us all well. Amen. That medicine, once taken, combined with strong efforts, partnership, working together to build and grow this country, should make this country a better place. Amen. There are going to be difficult times ahead, Mr. Speaker. But if we understand that if we work together, if we all join together and build this country, even in the face of conversation and discussion, that this will be a better Bahamas. I hope that the Lord will continue to bless us. I hope that the Lord will continue to bless the people, not just of Elizabeth, but the people of the Bahamas, and that he sees us through this difficult time. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As many, the Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Central and South Eleuthera.
Mr. Speaker, just before I get into my contribution, if you permit me, I will use this moment for something I wanted to do for 8 years now. I wanted to always go back to Princess Margaret Hospital to thank the staff. I think the administrator then was Ms. Cordy, I think it was. Hospital administrator, I think it was. call her name publicly because she was very, very instrumental in making sure that my wife got the care that she needed. Mr. Speaker, I think the audio won't work into us. I want to just repeat myself for a second. I would like to thank I think it was Ms. Curley was the hospital administrator at the time, Princess Margaret. And I never got the chance to say thank you to her and the hard-working staff at Princess Margaret. The morning of December 29th would be a day which I would remember for the rest of my life and include my family. The member for Elizabeth, I want to thank you because I remember 5 a.m. in the morning when you walked through the east side with a cup of coffee in your hand and you said to me, Hank, here we go again. Because just 6 months prior to that, we were at that same crossroad. And at that time, Princess Margaret weren't doing those type of surgeries. And Sam said to me, he said, I've never done it here. We cannot do it here because we don't have the manpower, we don't have the equipment. And he said, don't even think about airlifting her. It just can't happen. Dr. Sands came in and he put his team together. He said, talk to her, get her comfortable. Once she's comfortable, we'll be able to work something. So we got through that. And he said to me, he said, you do your part, you get the blood, you go to XYZ, and that we did. But Mr. Speaker, many Bahamians do not appreciate what we have in this country. That morning when the staff of Princess Margaret Hospital took possession of my wife and I saw the display of professionalism, I honestly thought I was in the United States. They handled her, they just came out and I saw her like I've never seen before. And I want to thank all of them. Because today, 8 years later, my wife is with me and my son is doing remarkably well. Mr. Speaker, once again, I am afforded the privilege to stand in this honorable place to raise my voice on behalf of the good and noble-minded people of South and Central Eleuthera. Mr. Speaker, I wish at this time to express my deepest sympathy to Reverend Claudius Bethel and Miss Shirley May Bethel from Hatchet Bay, who lost their daughter, Tabitha Hay, in the Labor Day tragedy. Also, to Mr. Howard Fernando on the loss of his brother, Mr. Robert Fernando, who will be laid to rest, this Saturday. To the Johnson family in Hatchet Bay who buried their brother Frankie just this past Saturday and is faced with the heart-wrenching news of the passing of their sister, Ramona Johnson, just a couple of days ago. It is my prayer that the God of all who kept us will continue to comfort those that mourn. And Mr. Speaker, I dare not forget my good friend, Pedro Miller from Greencastle. He was better known as Bubbles. Bubbles was one who went through that community and everyone knew who he was because that was the life that he lived. May their souls rest in peace. I would like to extend to the fathers of my constituency and all the fathers in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas that this Father's Day be the greatest one you've ever had. And all of you who have fathers out there, appreciate those fathers. Give them the love you give mother during the days of Mother's Day. Because without fathers, you would not be here either. And what happens is many times we do not get the recognition we should get. So I'm fighting for the fathers today.
Well, keep fighting, bro.
Valiant fight. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, allow me to congratulate a young man by the name of Mr. Jonathan Rendell from Central Eleuthera High for his great accomplishment as the Bahamas National Spelling Bee champion. He hails from the island of Eleuthera, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Jonathan was able to compete among 11 million spellers and entered from America, South Korea, Japan, Puerto Rico, the Bahamas, and Jamaica. Out of 519 spellers made it to the International Spelling Bee, recently held in Washington, D.C., where Master Jonathan placed 42nd, beating out some 477 spellers throughout the entire world. Isn't that an accomplishment? I must congratulate the parents, teachers, the principal, and coaches for a job well done. Mr. Speaker, I have a special invitation to attend the graduation ceremony this morning for the Ministry of Education Exceptional School in my constituency of Governor's Harbor. I am saddened as a father of the most wonderful stepdaughter who I spoke about recently. Why? I was invited this past Monday to attend the Ministry of Education Bahamas High School Diploma graduation ceremony, where the theme was understanding the whole picture and imagining the finished product. Mr. Speaker, our exceptional students were excluded, Mr. Speaker. This must not be allowed. This must not happen in my constituency again. When my daughter, I spoke of earlier, graduated from middle school in Florida, the armed guard from the White House attended her graduation only to present her with a certificate of academic achievements from that which came from the President of the United States of America, President George W. Bush. The Honorable Minister of Education was present at this year's ceremony, and our exceptional graduates missed out on that opportunity to be a part. I think it was a great disservice to those students who have worked so hard, perhaps even harder than our achievers at the regular school.
Honorable member,
Because
I think we won't have a quorum if honorable member, you do.
may I proceed?
Honorable member, you may continue.
Thank you. The Honorable Minister of Education was present at this year's ceremony, and our exceptional graduates missed out on that opportunity to be a part. I think it was a great disservice to those students who have worked so hard, perhaps even harder than our achievers at the regular schools, because they are coming into at a disadvantage. No students left behind, and different is not wrong. It is simply different. So next year, Honorable Member for South Beach, I am sure we'll be presenting those graduates with their certificates as well, because there will be inclusion. I am confident that my government is the most caring and sensitive government ever. South and Central Eleuthera expects no less. Mr. Speaker, I am elated to be able to speak on this, the people's budget, for it is only by precedence and earnest teachings of right principles can one exclude wrong thoughts. Unless we plant the seed of truth in the hearts of the people, the enemy will continue to sow troublesome weed on tares, as it is stated in the Bible. One must note, in the introduction of this budget, it was created to put an end to previous practices of fiscal mismanagement, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if only for this alone, I say, to God be the glory. The people of the Bahamas desired leadership that would be accountable to them. On May 10th, 2017, they spoke with one voice, and that was the people's choice. In my constituency in South and Central Eleuthera, there are some 100 plus customers of the Bahamas Electricity Corporations that will benefit from the new waiver VAT on the residential electrical bills. Mr. Speaker, further in my constituency, there are some 200 plus customers of the Water and Sewage Corporation who will benefit from the new waiver of VAT. The increase in customs personal travel exemptions from $300 to $500 per person is well received by my constituents. I am told by a single mother who entered into an ASU, saving $5,000 to enable her and her 3 children to have a vacation this summer in South Florida and do their back-to-school shopping, that she's almost grateful for the increase in customs exemption, which she will, for the first time in a very long time, to be able to take advantage of shopping for her personally. Mr. Speaker, I would like to commend this government, my government, the people's government, on its commitment to fiscal responsibility in providing sinking funds for the national debt and endeavors to bring the debt to GPD to a ratio down. This can only be to our benefits in the future. While we must continue to push towards fiscal responsibility, we in South and Central Eleuthera recognize that Rome was not built in a day. Therefore, we must stay focused and determined towards the rebirth of our Bahama land. After much consultation with the leaders and leadership of my constituency of South and Central Eleuthera, Mr. Speaker, they recognize that it would not be easy as a result of the 4.5% increase on VAT. However, Mr. Speaker, they also recognize and appreciate the fact that it must be done in order to gain stability to the country which we love. South and Central Eleuthera would like to see the bed taxes coming in on the sinking funds for the national debt by way of taxation on the bed taxes from home rentals. Mr. Speaker, I pause there for a second. Mr. Speaker, one of the things that happens in the family of islands, in Eleuthera in particular, we welcome the visitors and we welcome the foreigners who have their second homes there. But Mr. Speaker, when we have little hotels that have to pay their taxes for every guest that enters their facility, so should they. Those bed taxes should be paid. No ifs, ands, and buts, and the government have to find the ways and means of making this happen, because it is a disadvantage to those hoteliers, especially in the family islands. So that is one of the things that we have to look into, Mr. Speaker, to make sure that those taxes are paid, because we have a lot of the guests that visits, and a lot of them who have homes there often say, well, Mr. Johnson, where do I pay it? I don't think it's because of them sometimes, it's because of the negligence on our behalf as a country, as a government. So we need to get that going. There's an income, and I'm certain Eleuthera will benefit from that. Mr. Speaker, as the government searches for ways to raise the revenue without raising taxes, maybe this is the time to consider ways to expand tourism in my constituency, like having more cruise ship passengers visiting the islands, leaving their dollars without leaving an enormous footprint on our delicate resources. Mr. Speaker, when one looks at the rich history of Eleuthera, the land of freedom, we must find ways to expose it in a greater number of visitors, thus collecting revenue without raising taxes. Mr. Speaker, I stop here again. Mr. Speaker, as one of the first-timers here in this Honorable House of Assembly, we had so much different versions of this bill back and forth in this House. I don't think, basically listening to all of the speeches we've had so far, everyone basically recognized there is a need to increase taxes. But why is it so difficult when other members feel within themselves that you should perhaps introduce what we call an income tax, or other taxes, as a matter of fact? Tax is tax. So why are we bickering about the taxes? We all recognize that taxes need to be paid to keep the country afloat. We all recognize that we have to pay taxes to keep the country afloat. So, what I am saying today is this. You might have a version, and I may have one. At this time, the VAT is the way to go. And the mere fact, Mr. Speaker, other taxes that some of the members want to introduce to this Honorable House will take up to 3 years. So at the end of 3 years, where will this country be? We have to keep the ship afloat while we can. And maybe perhaps down the road, the adjustments can be made. We call ourselves leaders. We must lead the Bahamian people by example. We must be honest and we must speak the truth. And the time has come. Our country has reached a crisis point. So let's deal with it. Mr. Speaker, if I may, just bear with me a second, please. Mr. Speaker, relating to the gaming industry, Mr. Speaker, if we look and see what is happening now outside with the march, has the FNM made mistakes? Yes, we have. But we have to also dismantle what is fundamentally wrong and correct. Yes. People voted for the gaming. I stand on my 2 feet to represent the small men who have been economically raped by the rich when they were when, for example, we have little shanty towns, and we have the situation where then those homes are torn down, and then the regular man has to go and get regularized and make sure he have all of his permits in place. We are passing it on to one set, and another set is getting away. Mr. Speaker, that is not good for this country. Mr. Speaker, as a young man, I was never one to play the game of chance and risk the freedom and souls of many maybe yet unborn. I am not one to engage in any game of chance. Presently, there are 12 number houses in my constituency, Mr. Speaker. 12. From Parliamentary in the south to Hatchet Bay in the north. Mr. Speaker, while we're speaking about the number houses, there was just a few years ago when the Bahamian people went to the polls and voted on this gaming business. We voted on that gaming business. And today we are reaping the results because the government of the day chose to go against the wishes of the Bahamian people. And you see what's happening here today? It's here. Whether they're being paid or not, but it's here. That goes to show you what we will be coming up against. And Mr. Speaker, the opposite side may be rejoicing today, but if God willing, you never know, the time will come when they might be in this, and it will happen to them too. So we have to be careful of what we bring into our country.
Mandatory.
Mr. Speaker, I chaired an organization in my community for 16 years, Mr. Speaker, and members of my organization went to the number houses and requested assistance for the development of those communities, Mr. Speaker, and for the help with those festivals. Mr. Speaker, After 16 years, not one ever contributed to putting a dime back into that community that I'm aware of.
Wow.
Mr. Speaker, but they're in those communities, making millions of dollars, and choose not to put nothing back into those communities, especially in the family lines, Mr. Speaker. Especially in the family lines where it's needed. Mr. Speaker, it's not good.
No.
Mr. Speaker, not only that, moving through my constituency and speaking with those young ladies working at the number houses, some of whom who are mothers, taking home like some are 200, maybe less, no more than that, per week. Mr. Speaker, this is criminal. These persons are risking their lives and continuously resisting the temptation of becoming dishonest and possibly facing court. Why should the children of these workers not be recipients of certain academics? The small communities benefit from such taxation. Again, with much discussion, South and Central Illusory report supports the increase in taxation on the gaming houses, Mr. Speaker. We support that. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to the Road Traffic Board. Mr. Speaker, the Road Traffic Board is responsible for franchise in New Providence, while road traffic boards appointed by the local governments are responsible for Family Island franchise. The present board in New Providence was appointed early in my government's administration, and I was appointed chairman, of which I am grateful. The board is set to assist the department and the minister in improving the delivery of quality service to the motoring public. Since taking office, the board has met and made suggestions to recall and, in some cases, cancel the cancellation of self-drive franchise that has been renewed for more than 5 years, Mr. Speaker. Such practices clogs the system and hinders others from having the opportunity to pursue such businesses. Mr. Speaker, the board has therefore put into place a policy to begin to address this concern. Persons are therefore issued a grant letter with a 90-day period to get the vehicles on the road. However, if the individual encounters difficulties in meeting the deadline, one can apply to the controller for a further extension. What level of compassion? Truly, it is the people's time. Mr. Speaker, persons with private schedule plates are reminded that the plates are to be placed on vehicles with a capacity of more than 12 seats. Individuals who are in violation have been given an extension of 6 months to correct this practice. Indeed, it is the people's time. We wish to employ each of you for being diligent in your efforts to ensure that you comply with the order. Road safety is an important focus of this, the people's government, this Free National Movement government. Eleuthera is among the highest traffic death per capita in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to report that the government has a joint venture with the Bahamas Striping, which has had a positive effect on traffic safety in the streets. The Bahamas Striping Group of companies assisted with addressing the potholes, installing solar cat eyes along the main roads of the island. Mr. Speaker, there is currently road works being carried out in central Eleuthera as we speak. The honorable member from Carmichael, the Minister of Works, however, we will not become complacent and do not want, however, we will not become complacent and do not want, what we do not want is necessity to enhance the effort of our government. I'm aware, Mr. Speaker, that the Ministry of Transport and the local government is leading the charge to improve road safety throughout the country. I am convinced that his efforts will bring awareness to the general public as it focuses on child and adults. children and adults. The theme, road traffic, road safety, is everyone's business. The theme, road safety, is everyone's business. It's now becoming a part of our everyday experience. The Junior Road Safety Initiative is an excellent initiative, and I'm certain that it will further assist in the reduction of numbers of casualties and fatalities on our streets. Mr. Speaker, there is progress being made in my constituency. We are on the upward trend, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am happy. After getting results from my government and the investors that has now returned to the shores of Eleuthera, Mr. Speaker, the Potlatch Club in Governor's Harbor Investments, it's a $3 million investment in which is renovating of a previous closed facility to offer self-catering hotels, cottages of up to 40 guests, with a kitchen, bar, and restaurant. Butterfield Eco Lodge, Bannerman Town. Bannerman Town, one of the smallest communities in Eleuthera. Today, it has been approved they will be having a small resort there, and I am happy for Bannerman Town. It's just 10 rooms, but it is the beginning. Mr. Speaker, and this facility is going to be costing them $1.5 million. Mr. Speaker, in the Governor's Harbor area, there's a unicorn development. It's a residential area. It's subdivision comprising of cottages and townhouses. It's a small investment, but it's $550,000. And this, Mr. Speaker, is one of the since we came into office, and we were able to reduce the investment approvals to $250,000. This is one of those projects that, as a result of that reduction, is beginning to pay off. So members, the bill which we passed and lowered the figures to $250,000, as a result, Eleuthera have won already. Mr. Speaker, Mid-Eleuthera Properties in Governor's Harbor. All goes well, Mr. Speaker. It's a resort that is there now that will be have an extension added to it. And they're looking at putting in $15 million. As soon as all of the legal ramifications are completed, that project will be on its way. Mr. Speaker, we're also looking at a 24 single villas, 4 bedrooms, 1 beach bar, and a pool, 1 wedding pavilion, and certain retail stores. The estimated cost is $30 million, which is the French Leave development right inside Governor's Harbor. And we pray, as they have said, hopefully by October or November, that project should start. Mr. Speaker, I must commend the Right Honorable Renver Vels, Minister of Agriculture and Marine Resources, and the hard-working professionals at BAIC for showing up to a town meeting and informing the residents of Hatchet Bay. As a result, there are some 80+ applications who are waiting to take advantage of the land availability. Mr. Speaker, this has been a nightmare to the people in North, in particular in Hatchet Bay, in the Hatchet Bay, Gregorytown, James Siston area, Mr. Speaker, that they always felt and they were deprived of their rights by being able to get a piece of their community. This government, Mr. Speaker, has made it available that they come in and apply for it. Mr. Speaker, there's nothing free. But just being able to come in and apply for a piece of the land $1,000 per year on a lease basis, Mr. Speaker. We are proud to be able. Also presently, ongoing, is the construction of a dry dock facility where mariners, yachts, and ships will take advantage of this facility. Mr. Speaker, this facility is in Hatchet Bay. The government has granted permission, Minister Vales, thank you, and your crew, because the project is on the way, and they have it all fenced in, and it's moving. It's moving. So for that project, Mr. Minister, we're not talking. It's reality. Mr. Speaker, I stand today in honor of the resilient spirit of the people of the island of the land of freedom, Israel. My definition of resilience is where my dream is being attacked, when your source of earnings and living appears to be dwindling due to unemployment or the forces of greed and selfishness, when it appears that the access to justice appears to be out of reach. A flame of hope that governs the warrior spirit in all of us fights back. It is the strength of our faith, the belief of our dream, that strengthens the warrior in us to remain focused and relentless, pursue the enemy of our dream. There is a family in Illustra, Mr. Speaker, whose faith has been tested for more than 23 years by some of the rich and most powerful, who apparently assume that the laws of the Bahamas does not apply to them. Apparently, they thought that their power and influence shielded them from the consequences of greed and fraudulent Ponzi schemes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we all fell short of the glory of God. I fell short. We all fell short. As I stand up as a voice petitioning for justice for the people of South and Central Illustra, I indeed, the people of the Bahamas. I do say with mixed emotions, I know and I understand and expect for the grace of God, there go I. However, I also stand to serve as the voice petitioning for justice with the understanding that the books of law, the Bible also warns that the defeat of corruption requires exposure and the execution of law that delivers justice, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am in possession of evidence that the Sunshine Group, led by one of our celebrated sons who hard worked, lifted him from poverty to the high place of influence and wealth. The injustice evidence exposes the Ponzi scheme that sought to steal the inheritance of a family in Illustra of 50,000 acres. The scheme entangles law firms and also financial institutes that not only sought to defraud the family of the inheritance, but to defraud Bahamians and second home residents multiple millions of dollars, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this has been going on too long in the island of Illustra, in South Illustra in particular, Mr. Speaker. It annoys me as a resident from Illustra to see how my island is being treated sometimes, Mr. Speaker. Too much people in the family islands are being taken advantage of, Mr. Speaker. And the time has come that someone had to stand up and speak for those who cannot speak for themselves, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I gave my word to my people, giving me an opportunity to stand in this honorable house. I will do that which is right in the sight of God, and I will stand and speak on their behalf at whatever cost, Mr. Speaker. Over the weekend, the Illustra family, after fighting for 23 years in the court system and overcoming by deliberate experience of inexcusable delays, files being lost, etc., erected 35-inch signs that read, Mr. Speaker, "Private property do not enter." Initially, the residents of Illustra did not understand what was going on. Now that they do, they are outraged, Mr. Speaker. Ordinary hardworking Bahamians were charged $6,000 for a piece of property that they did not own, the people did not own. It means that the title deeds given by the Bahamians are given to the Bahamians are fraud, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there are many royals of industry in the land of freedom, dating back from the 1900s. Mr. Speaker, the owners of pharmaceuticals and oil companies have second homes there and being impacted by this Ponzi scheme, Mr. Speaker. As I watched the historical wedding between the sixth in line of the throne, Prince Harry and the Duchess Meghan Markle, I reflected on Prince Harry's visit to the Bahamas in 2012 and his parents' love for Eleuthera. Prince Charles, who lived in Minimi Island, which is 5 to 10 miles north of Cotton Bay. The investors of Cotton Bay is another group of people who have fallen victims to this scheme, Mr. Speaker. One of the royals of Gulf, Tiger Woods, is one of the investors, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, leaders from our global community visit and spend weekends and months in the Bahamas because of the beauty of the Bahamas and the hospitality and character of our people. One of the attractions of Prince Charles was a baker in Savannah Son, Mr. Henry Sands. Prince Charles loved his bread, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Sands' bread and excellent service secured him an invitation to Buckingham Palace. Over the years, our service has slipped. Our reputation is damaged. Our reputation in service attracts opportunities that significantly contributes to the growth and the development of our great little nation. It is time for the rebirth of our good name, Mr. Speaker. Proverb tells us that a good name is preferred over all the riches in the world. A good name attracts opportunity. A poor reputation repels opportunities. I'm calling on all members of this honorable House to lead the way to the renewal of our good name. It requires we make personal commitments to improve. Me, through painful and unpopular, it requires that we stand for the truth and justice even when we have to choose between protecting our political allies, families, and friends. It is rough. We know that in our political culture, there are friends and business partners that cooperate in private, fights in public. It's rough. However, we have reached a time in our development where we must choose whether we will fulfill the vision that God and our founding fathers have for us, which is to be the greatest little country in the world. I said, the greatest little country in the world. Or, Mr. Speaker, to continue to govern in a fashion that eventually leads to death of hope of the people. History is repelled with examples when defiant disobedience destroys the reputation of goodness. Greece was once an empire. The debt is fighting them up to the proverbial chin. Oil that once fueled the economy of Venezuela, corruption has destroyed it. I believe that we are on the threshold of a renewal in the Bahamas. It cannot be a mistake that the people of my island, the island of freedom, is positioned to be the beacon of hope and opportunity for the downtrodden, our fellow Bahamians. And as a matter of fact, any people who legally live in our country are borders that help to build our nation. When Lady Justice is blind to race, gender, class, nationality, freedom, and opportunity regains. I call on my government, the FNM. I also call on Her Majesty opposition to PLP to stand tall with courage and conviction and take the necessary action, steps to bring an end to the continuous stench of corruption and restore the faith of the Bahamian population. In all of us, as their representatives in this honorable place, by doing the right thing, the honorable thing. We are on our way up, as long as we throw the Judas of integrity overboard, Mr. Speaker. In the words of Johnny Nash, I can see clearly now, the rain is gone. I can see all obstacles in my way.
Old school.
Gone are the dark clouds that had me blind.
Old school.
It's going to be a bright, bright, sunshiny day.
Old school, what? Watch out.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to say this again. Gone. I can see all obstacles in my way. Gone are the dark clouds that had me blind. It's going to be a bright, sunshiny day. I think I can make it now. The pain is gone. There is that rainbow I have been praying for. Look straight ahead. Nothing but blue skies. There's going to be a bright, sunshiny day under this free national movement government, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, South and Central Eleuthera, Mr. Speaker, who I'm proud to represent.
Yes.
After consultation with the people from South and Central Eleuthera, Mr. Speaker,
Yes.
we stand wholly and boldly behind the bill which is before this honorable House today, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, South and Central is not supporting a partial bill. We are supporting the entire bill that's before this honorable House today, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm almost done. I just want to put just a couple.
No, you're almost done. You're almost done. It's almost done. Not quite. Not quite. Almost done.
Mr. Speaker, I want to go back and I want to reflect a little bit, Mr. Speaker, if I may.
It's appropriate to dump the water on.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Speaker,
Sick man, that's a sick mind.
Central
Sick mind.
and South Eleuthera does have
Not funny, that's a sick
some
mind.
issues, Mr. Speaker, that I would like to speak about. And I want to make these, and I'll make it quick so I want it to be on record.
Yes. Yes.
I know the Honorable Minister from Elizabeth spoke about health, but I want to remind them that the Eleutherians are still looking forward to that mini hospital that was promised by the previous administration, and we intended to take that to, so we know it's going to come a little later. And, Mr. Speaker, we are in desperate need of a clinic in the Roxanne community. Mr. Speaker, my residents, the Roxanne being the gateway to South Eleuthera, Mr. Speaker, we are looking forward to that new dock facility in Roxanne. And, Mr. Speaker, we're not asking much for Tarpon Bay. Tarpon Bay, both docks has been damaged. So if we could have those two docks repaired, we would be grateful. In Sporting, Mr. Speaker, all of the facilities in my entire constituency need some assistance, Mr. Speaker. We have problems. In fact, all of them has been neglected over the years. And we would appreciate if we can get some assistance in taking care of our sporting facilities. Mr. Speaker, also, in the Roxanne community, there's been a track there by the Preston H. School for a while. And we pray that the ministry will find some funding to try and pave that track for us. It's been sitting there for a while. Because you can tell, Eleuthera has been able to produce quite a bit of sprinters.
Yes.
As a result of them practicing on a hard road. So my case is good, Mr. Speaker. Eleuthera has brought some bacon to the country. So we have had several sprinters, and Chris Brown
Fireman.
is one of the proud
Absolutely.
men of the soil of South Eleuthera, Mr. Speaker.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Fireman.
And if we only get that in honor of Chris Brown, Mr. Speaker,
Right. The fireman.
the fireman, the only one.
Fireman Brown.
Mr. Speaker,
Fireman Brown.
the chairman spoke about the water and sewage situation in Central Eleuthera. I'm happy that it's being addressed. And also, Mr. Speaker, we have a water problem. It's not very big. Benamaton is not a real large community, but if we can take care of the water issue in Benamaton, we would be grateful. I would use this opportunity to apologize to the residents of Benamaton. Last time we were here, I was told by the utility company that their cable TV would have been up. It was in there before. And some reason they keep having difficulties. I know that they call every other month, and they're having difficulties with it, but I'm praying that they will get it together. So I do apologize to the people, the residents of Benamaton. I'm still pushing for you, and I'm certain that you will, at some point, be able to get your cable down there. Mr. Speaker, Preston H. High School has been there from the 70s. I visited the school several times. And I'm praying that, I hope that the Ministry of Education could do two things. Repair it or take it down. Repair it or take it down. Because the condition of the school, I'm not pleased at all to see the condition of Preston H. High School in Roxanne. And last but not least, if my Ministry of Education can see the completion of the classroom block at the Emma Cooper Primary School, it would do our hearts well. So Eleuthera is not asking for much. It just happened, we are not as fortunate as my member in the north. You see? So if the government can assist us with those few projects, I thank you very much. And again, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the good people of South and Central, we stand behind this 2018-19 budget. Thank you.
As many, the chair recognizes the honourable member for Angliston. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, as per the agreement that our caucus has with the opposition, we're going to break now and come back at 2 o'clock. The Prime Minister was insistent that we would give the member for Angliston an opportunity to speak, so we've rearranged our scheduling on our side. I am going to move at this time, Mr. Speaker, that the House do suspend for the lunch break until 2 p.m. And we will return to this House at 2 p.m. And I'm saying to all members, we are going to need to have a caucus. So I want members here at 2, a quorum. We're going to need to have a quorum. So I need all members here at 2 o'clock so that we can begin the business of this House in earnest. So now, Mr. Speaker, I will do move that the House suspends until 2 p.m. today.
I do second.
Chair recognizes the honourable member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador.
I think it's a matter of extreme public importance and interest. And I've gotten the news, and I wish to convey my condolences to the family of the lady that passed this morning following a horrific accident at Mannings Road. Now, I'm going to call the Minister, Mount Moriah, to boot in respect to this matter. As, first of all, I drew attention to the fact that this road could not just be closed because someone says close it. There's a protocol to close the roads. I asked before whether those protocols were engaged to close the road. These big barriers have been put in the road, and what has heightened the matter is that 2 accidents that have come to my attention before this incident that has now resulted in a fatality. And so I would have thought that after the first incident, that the police ought to have taken some notice of this. Now I note that since one of the accidents, a sign was put up on Gladstone Road that says that road is no longer a through road. But I don't know whether that in itself is sufficient. First of all, the police ought to confirm whether or not the road was lawfully closed. Because you just don't do it so. And if it isn't, then those barriers ought to be removed, allowed to be a through road until the proper processes have been engaged to ensure that it is properly closed. Now you have to wait until a fatality. I would have thought that the police ought to have taken some action because the 2 previous accidents caused, pardon me? No, yeah,
Yes,
I don't engage you in that because that's puerile. What I'm talking about,
Honorable member, the chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member has raised the issue in this place, and I know that the Minister of Works,
Honorable member.
the Minister of Works is not in the House at this time, and I'm sure that during his contribution he will probably speak to it, as well as I'm sure during the member's contribution he will probably reiterate it again. So we will have others in the House who will be able to respond. So I do move at this time, Mr. Speaker, that the House suspends and that we come back at 2 p.m. to continue the people's business.
Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the business of this House do suspend until 2 p.m. sharp this afternoon. As many as in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The business of this House stands suspended until 2 p.m. this afternoon.